Hello, hello, this is Alex Burkett, and you are listening to the Long Game Podcast. Today I'm chatting with Alicia Johnston. Alicia is the Director of Content at Sprout Social. We covered a lot today, but one big topic that made me excited was learning about how Sprout Social conducts data-driven thought leadership using their own first-party data as well as surveys. You've all read statistics and blog posts, often from decades ago, stuff like, for every $1 you spend on email marketing, you get $38 in revenue, or whatever. Sprout Social continually mines their own data for trends, insights, statistics, all of the stuff that educates the market, helps people better use their product, and obviously creates great content as well. We also chatted about video marketing, mostly on YouTube, balancing SEO and thought leadership in hyper-competitive markets, and much, much more. Without further ado, here is my conversation with Alicia Johnston. Throwback, I was looking at your LinkedIn and I saw that you had an anthropology minor in college.
Yes, I did.
Okay, so I was wondering, I took one anthropology class and I can see like the kind of relevance towards customer research. So has that in any way influenced your approach to content marketing, starting out early studying anthropology, particularly on researching customers and audience?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question, man. And that's a throwback too. I would say yes. Even outside of formal study, though, people have always been so interesting to me. So I think I grew up as a huge reader. I was always devouring a book, whether it was like dark outside and I was trying to hold it up to the window to read, or like in a car trip or something like that, which I think engendered a lot of curiosity about people, about different cultures, about different ways of growing up. And then formalizing that with studying some anthropology. I didn't go too deep as a minor. Definitely awakened like a more systemic way of looking at it. One of the classes that I took that I really loved was life story interviews and life histories. And so with that class, we read a bunch of classic life histories, which is an interview methodology. And then we conducted our own. And so like that type of project where you're really deeply connecting with and interviewing one individual and learning everything you possibly can about their life and their habits and everything that's made them who they are. Now that you've brought it up, I can definitely see the connection to content work today.
Can you tell me more about that idea of, it's called a life history? What exactly is that interview methodology and how does that work? I've never heard of that.
Yeah. So, well, there's many different approaches to it. And honestly, I am a little rusty at this point, but bare bones, it is an approach where you try to learn from the person and ideally from those around them, everything you possibly can about who they are, kind of why they are or what their why is, and how that relates to their culture and anything, usually I think if you're doing this with someone, if it's a professional anthropologist, you're probably focusing on them for a specific reason, like they're emblematic of a certain culture, they're a leader within a certain group. And so really understanding, like using interviews, hours and hours of interviews, to dig into everything that they probably don't find significant, similar to doing customer interviews. Like it's the things that people don't think are significant that end up probably being some of the most important. But yeah, you go through tons of interviews. You do a lot of other research outside of that into their background, where they grew up, different subgroups they're a part of. And for me, something that was really valuable is I interviewed someone who was really involved as a leader, a public leader in the recovery community. And so reading a lot about storytelling in Alcoholics Anonymous and storytelling in 12-step programs, like that was part of my research. So that was something I found really interesting. And then you kind of figure out how to weave that all together into one story. Sometimes it's often told in the first person, but there's different approaches, of course. So yeah, that was kind of how we went about it.
So this makes me like think of customer personas or buyer personas. Mm-hmm. Do you build customer personas at Sprout Social? Like, how do you feel? Because I feel like this is a very individualized approach, whereas the usual buyer persona is some sort of a composite, that you build with hypotheses, your ideas of who you want to target, some customer interviews, and you sort of come up with a simplified model that includes all these components of different individuals. So what are your thoughts on customer personas?
Yeah, we do use customer personas at Sprout, and this is actually very timely because a couple different teams are working on refreshing them and creating some new ones. Um, I think I think customer personas are really helpful. I think that even though you're trying to create an amalgam of many different people and bring them all together into one, having that person in mind and knowing like I'm writing for Danny, like I'm writing for Ashley or whatever the person's name, the fake person's name is, I think can just be so helpful because it really taps into your empathy as a marketer, and it forces you to think about not just how somebody would react or how they would buy, but how they're thinking, how they're feeling, what fears they have. So I think personas are super valuable. And currently we're actually working on the content side, some additional research on the content habits of some of our new personas. And then on the product marketing side, working on kind of expanding our personas beyond a lot of the user personas and the buyer personas we've used in the past, and thinking more about sort of influencer personas or personas of people who are really important within a deal, but we might not have been targeting as in as focused a way in the past.
Do you share customer personas within the company? Like, is the product team using the same personas that the marketing team is, and the content teams using the same personas that the customer success team is? Is it all one thing, or are you kind of like taking an individualized approach?
Yeah. So historically, I think different teams typically have their own different approaches. So like product design will use jobs to be done. And we're aware of those in marketing, and some teams use them, but some teams use more of a persona document. But with all of this new research, we're working to bring them together into one more consolidated format. So ideally, we would have a persona that we're coming together with product marketing, with content, with UX and research, building that, and then offering kind of the core persona as well as the specific areas that like sales enablement and sales reps can use, content and communications folks can use, and so on.
Many people that I talk to when researching some background research on you mention that you have a keen eye for data, and you're very data driven with your content marketing. So how much of your persona development is based on like concrete quantitative data, sort of like maybe Ahrefs or SimilarWeb or BuzzSumo, versus hypotheses and maybe even more of the qualitative one-to-one? Like, how do you look at data collection when it comes to informing who you're writing to?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we benefit, or I guess I would say I benefit from having a marketing team that is very data-driven as a whole. And so if I'm data-driven, it's only because I have access to all of these amazing resources. So we have a number of regular sort of intake mechanisms for customer data. We have a post-purchase survey that is really helpful in revealing exactly what people's pain points were that they're hoping to solve with Sprout. What, as someone who's pretty new and coming into the product with fresh eyes, what they're liking, what's challenging, what they're hoping to grow or to learn. So that data is gathered by the customer marketing team, but that's something that we have access to as well. So I think that can go into specifically some of the pain points, challenges in that area. For me, I like to do a lot of qualitative research. So I like to use LinkedIn quite a bit, always be stalking. It's like the marketing motto. So going into LinkedIn, looking at people with a variety of different job titles that all seem to center around the same persona, and trying to understand how they talk about their job, how they talk about themselves, and weaving that into our personas as well. And then we didn't do this last time, but something that I would like to incorporate more of is our own social listening data. So in Sprout, there's a social listening platform, and you can use that to really analyze like huge swaths of conversation and trends happening on social. So we do use that internally to inform content and social strategy, but I think bringing that specifically into our persona work will really help enrich those as well.
Do you find that some sources of data are more or less trustworthy than others? Like when I was at CXL, I found actually the most impactful thing that I could do was go to conferences and have conversations during happy hour, because people's guards were down and they would talk about their actual pain points in the job. Whereas sometimes the more formal customer surveys, for example, you get a selection bias. So like only people who would take the survey would give information. And then they're sort of doing this rational justification for the reasons. Whereas like in their natural habitats, they would be a little bit more open about the things they actually care about. Do you find any difference among kind of those different research gathering strategies?
Yeah. I mean, I think social listening is a good example because, as you know, people will be very honest online, and they don't always try to couch their opinions. And so, social is a great place to really dig into some of those unfiltered thoughts. And you might not always like exactly the comment you read, but you can hopefully pick up themes and trends if people are complaining about a certain thing, or if they're expressing frustration, or if they're saying that something is life changing and that they absolutely loved it. So I think listening can be a great place for unfiltered conversation. I think, Guard is definitely still up, but I do think that gong calls and like sales call recordings can be a really good source of data as well, because folks are talking directly to their rep, so an individual who they have a relationship with, and have a rapport with, where they can be a little more honest and they share some historical context as well. I think with a lot of data, though, it's just applying a critical thinking lens to it. Like, never take anything at face value, especially if it feels weird. if you have a data point and you think that's really strange, like there's always something to investigate there. And maybe it just means that your hypothesis was wrong, or that your long held belief has actually, the industry's changed and you weren't keeping up. But sometimes you will be able to uncover that actually that data is not all it's cracked up to be, and you need a different way of looking at it.
Yeah, I think there's always like a gulf between what people say they want and what they do,
Yes.
Stated versus revealed preferences, and trying to get to the root of that is very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you can ever fully get to the bottom of that, but I would imagine that during especially social listening and a lot of this, customer interviews, even if it's not getting to the grain of what somebody actually wants or what they're actually doing, I would imagine that you'd still find interesting pain points to write articles about, to create videos about, to create content about. It gives you a seed of an idea. So does this stuff also, are you incorporating it into your content planning, or how does that work?
Yeah, definitely. So we've incorporated that into our content planning in so many different ways. So I would say, zooming out and looking at how we plan our editorial calendar, we've used a variety of methods. Like for our brainstorms, we'll often include a few folks from customer success, and or from the social team, or someone who's really on the front lines of hearing from customers and understanding those pain points. So yes, we're having a content brainstorm, but we're also asking them to bring that perspective of exactly what they're hearing, put their lens to the topics that we think would be valuable, or that we found from other sources like keyword research might be important to tackle. So I think that's one. And then with every brief, we're also looking at, what do we want the person to, I use know, do, feel. Like, what do we want them to know, do, and feel after they've read this piece? I think everyone has a little bit of their own lens that they put on it, but understanding exactly the goal of like what you need to accomplish in your content. To me, you have to be able to understand pain points to really do that effectively. If you don't know who you're writing for and you don't know what they care about, creating a piece that is going to meaningfully accomplish your goals is very challenging. I think that's where we end up with a lot of like copycat content in the industry, or content that's just like fine, but fine doesn't really differentiate you.
Yeah, so I wanted to touch on this copycat content thing. In the space that Sprout Social operates, it's very competitive. MarTech in general, I feel like, is notoriously good at content marketing. So it's like any space you're in, whether it's a CRM or email marketing software or social media software, there's 10 other companies who are doing content, and probably like one big juggernaut, usually HubSpot, because they have products for everything. But like y'all are very SEO driven. Like you do a lot of SEO in addition to thought leadership. So how do you actually, this is a grandiose question, but how do you stand out among not only direct competition, but actually strong organic competition?
Yeah, absolutely. I think about this all the time. So I think, you have to understand the game to play it. So first, we have really strong partners in our SEO team who can provide a lot of value around keyword research, content strategy from an SEO standpoint, as well as search intent, and really help us bring all of that into our content plans and briefs. But from there, the lens that our team is bringing is always, how can we stand out? How can we differentiate ourselves? So I think a few of the things that our team puts a lot of emphasis on are interviewing subject matter experts and bringing first person accounts and quotes into our content. I think, it's great because it makes the content stronger and it helps the writer better understand exactly who they're trying to speak to, but it also gives the content ways to stand out on social, through email, through other distribution channels. So subject matter experts are one. Data, producing a lot of data-driven thought leadership and using our own social listening tool for more ad hoc data pulls gives us a lot to work with. So every brief will typically include some internal statistics, if we have them, about pieces that we've published in the past and researched in the past that we could bring into that. And that tracks really well with some research that our UX team did recently around brand experience. And they looked into, what our target audience is most interested in and values the most from a content perspective. And it was great because they saw that even with topics that are a little more generic, like topics that everyone needs to cover, what is X or how to Y, they really appreciate statistics. They really appreciate that are well cited. They really appreciate hearing from first person experts. And that's something that makes the brand seem more credible. So that's kind of how we think about differentiation.
What kind of statistics are you talking about? Is this like, you see commonly cited stats all over articles, like for every dollar you put into email marketing, you get $38 back and stuff like that. And then you just see that same statistic being repeated over and over. You're saying you do first party polls where you can actually come up with stats from your user base and anonymized, of course.
Yeah. So we produce a number of ongoing data reports every year. Our largest one is called the Sprout Social Index, and that's an annual sort of state of social report and campaign. And it's pretty robust. So we're able to use it to ask both consumers and marketers their feelings on social media use, social media strategy, what they want from the brand consumer relationship. And that gives us so much to work with over the course of the year. So we can pull those stats into relevant pieces. Like, for example, we ask about platform preferences and trends. So anytime we're writing a piece about a specific platform, we already have some of our own data that we can incorporate. And beyond that too, we can also look at the report as a whole and distill down some of the themes. And from there, do some keyword research based on what our findings were, so that we can create a content plan built out from the report itself. So there's kind of both the reactive and proactive approach to pulling data into content.
Do you do link building based on this stuff too? Do you like proactively reach out to companies and blogs who have cited outdated statistics and say, hey, we just did this study and actually it contradicts what you've said here, link to this, or is that part of the plan?
It is something we would like to be part of the plan. We do a ton of outreach through our PR team. They do a lot of research both to top tier outlets as well as to a lot of the marketing trade publications. And we also have a really strong co-marketing team that works more with marketing peers. But I do think link building is an opportunity to grow, because if this works well organically and kind of starts to pick up some backlinks as we go, I think that there's a lot more opportunity to be gained by becoming more proactive about it.
Yeah, that stuff worked so well when I was at CXL. We've had for a short time period this hypothesis that we could become sort of an I don't even remember the brand name. It might have been e-consultancy or one of those.
I remember them. I can
labs,
picture
right?
their blog.
Yeah. So they would put out studies all the time, like mostly with like 5 to 10 users, and like kind of look at patterns on websites. And we bought all of this eye tracking equipment, like biometric tracking stuff. And we had people come in and view search results. And there was this common wisdom that you would look at the top and then sort of your eyes would graze over to the right side, and then it would filter out pretty slowly. Or actually, sorry, it was the F pattern. The F pattern was the common wisdom. And we did a study that showed that actually wasn't true anymore, because now there's like SERPs features and snippets and ads and whatnot. And basically we put that out and we publish guest posts everywhere, and people would pick it up, and we could reach out to all the companies that had cited the old statistics. That stuff was super valuable, because you're not just reaching out kind of begging for a link. You actually have new and interesting information.
Absolutely. And that sounds like an awesome study too.
It was fun. I don't think it like paid the bills, like buying all that tracking equipment, but it was a really cool link building tactic. What was I going to say about the link? Oh yeah. So your statistics and these studies, how are you conducting this? Do you have data scientists that work on this all the time? Are you on the content and marketing team kind of dictating what things you want to learn? Like how does the process of the data analysis actually work?
So originally, it's always kind of been within content and communications, but we actually did hire a researcher late last year to come in who's really been applying a more sophisticated level to it. I feel like I can say that because I used to do it myself. And so it's someone doing something better than I did, which is awesome. And yeah, so currently the process is that he'll work through the survey design with a lot of input from folks across the social team, various regional marketing teams, and the content team as well. And typically survey is the main methodology that we're using, or the main approach that we're using for these reports. And then build out a number of different surveys for consumers, marketers, and then we do a US specific one and a UK and Ireland specific one. And then go through all of that data. He'll conduct the analysis, and from there, start kind of pairing up with a writer and a content strategist and refining, riffing, figuring out what exactly the narrative is, and then kind of flowing into the creative process.
Do you start with a hypothesis as to like a trend or something you'd like to learn? Like, would you say, I wonder what the average TikTok influencer earns per month, or I wonder how fast TikTok is outpacing Snapchat in growth? Or is it more so you just take a broad survey where you could learn many potential things, maybe like, 20, 30, 40 questions, and like hopefully something kind of arises from the statistical noise, and that's a pattern? Or like, is it more exploratory, or is it more dictated by kind of what you you want to talk about already?
Yeah, I would say it's both. So we do have some questions we ask year over year to understand how trends are changing and be able to benchmark against our previous data, because we've been doing this index in some form for 9 years. So there is a lot of historical data we can compare to, and being able to watch those trends is really interesting. But then of course, we also want to open it up to what's most timely and most relevant for us as well as for our audience. So I would say we have, I would say we use questions more than hypotheses, but they're just the flip kind of. So if there's a question that we really want to know, like, okay, everyone's talking about TikTok. We think everyone's using it. It's exploding, but like, how are brands actually using it? Things like that, and things trying to understand what's below the surface for some of those trends we're seeing, as well as looking ahead and saying like, okay, I think for the index this year, a good example is looking into the metaverse. People are talking about it a lot. Are consumers actually, adopting anything related to the metaverse? Are brand marketers investing in it? What level of priority does that have? How confident do they feel in their efforts, or where are the gaps that are still existing since this is such an emerging area? So trying to balance some of that more year over year state of the industry, platform trend type stuff with answering the questions that we're most curious about, and answering the questions that our customers are most curious about too.
That's interesting how you put it. The first one is just longitudinal. Like, it's always interesting to see how things are growing or shrinking or changing. But then on the other side, it's almost like you're trying to fact check claims with actual data. And I was thinking about that because like you could do it two ways. And this is how I've done it in the past, which is like there's common wisdom, and you want to see if that still applies or ever applied. And that was kind of the F pattern study that we did. And then something in the past that I've had success with these data-driven studies is a lot of brands come out with very contrarian and bold claims. Like a couple years ago, I think it was Drift that came out with the idea that forms are dead. Nobody wants to use forms, right? That was a big product marketing push of theirs. So I was like, is that true? Because I feel like I don't actually enjoy using chatbots. Like, so we did a little study at HubSpot, and yet it turns out like form conversion rates were still superior to chatbots, and people actually preferred them in many cases. So it's like you can kind of fact check what people are saying and say, well, actually the data is saying this. And of course, there's some messiness and sample bias and all that stuff. But I think it's interesting to take something people are already talking about, whether common old wisdom or new things that people are proclaiming. Say like, are people excited about the metaverse? Like, is this actually a thing?
Yeah. I mean, and that also scratches my internal curmudgeon itch. I'm like, I see a big trend and I'm like, but is it a trend? Like, what's the substance underneath that? And I think that helps really build conviction. Like, I love when findings from this research challenge something that that I believe. And I think across the team, that's true, because we also use this data, like the same way that people say you should dog food your own, or you should, eat your own dog food. You should also use your own data to refine and build and change your strategy. And so conveniently, since we are a social media company, we are always tweaking our social strategy. So getting this data every year and being able to also then see how others react to it really gives us a lot that we can change internally.
I think that most people don't want to challenge their assumptions, though. So I think you're on the rare side of this. And I think that actually good content marketers are like you, and that they're curious. I think curiosity is probably the biggest dimension that I index on for a good content marketer. But I don't think I don't think most people want to challenge their assumptions.
I don't know. I mean, I think that's what keeps it interesting, right? So I've been at Sprout for 7 years, and if I didn't learn something new pretty frequently, I would be very bored. And so I think being able to, social media is always evolving too. So thinking the same thing for 4 years in a row, either that's a conviction and you have some really strong passion around that belief, or you're hanging on to something that's not relevant anymore. So which one is it? And I always enjoy seeing kind of which plays out and what's the case. It's also, I think, inspiring for our team, because if you're working on content, you're creating new content day in and day out, it's exciting to have something different to say and to be able to look back and challenge that. And I think we know that people want brands, even B2B brands, to be as authentic and transparent as possible. And so even being able to say, like one thing we've talked about that we haven't done yet was, whenever we make predictions, can we go back in 6 months and analyze our own predictions and say where we fell down, say which ones actually did come true? I think that'd be really fun. I think that would make for a great live conversation on social or webinar or something like that. Top marketers admit where they were wrong.
I think that is incredibly rare. That is super rare to actually go back. Because I actually think there's this book by Nassim Taleb called Skin in the Game. And he talks about how if you actually, if you don't have money in a stock, like predicting it is kind of immoral. Because you can make a ton of predictions and one out of 100 might be right. And then you're going to look clairvoyant in retrospect. But nobody ever looks back at those 99 and says, oh, actually, my track record is horrible. So I don't think most people want to go back and do that. So it's incredible that y'all do that.
You have to have fun with it, right? And I think that's pretty fun. I think our team really does believe the best idea wins, and to be able to have a forum to acknowledge and learn from any areas that weren't correct. I mean, predictions are so, no matter how much data you have, if you're trying to look 1 year ahead or even further ahead, especially in social, something is going to be wrong. You're not going to get it right 100% of the time. And so it just adds a little bit of fun to be able to look back and see what worked and what didn't.
What's an example of something that you have predicted but were wrong about?
Good question. Well, I'm always right, so that's hard. No, just kidding. I really thought that Clubhouse was going to take off and stay taking off a lot more than it did. I think we're seeing a lot of, at least for me, a lot of trends that we saw during the earlier days of the pandemic that I thought were really going to represent a long-term change in consumer behavior. Some have played out, but they maybe haven't played out to the level that we had expected. And so I think that's a good example where, of course, it had some problems, but at the same time, the concept was really cool. And then we saw other platforms following suit, like with Twitter Spaces. I feel like Twitter Spaces has really kind of continued to grow. At least I should probably back that up with some data. But from what I've seen anecdotally, more and more people are using it. Whereas Clubhouse seemed to kind of just recede. And I know it's still there. I know people are still using it, but that's one that I think I was a little more bullish on than played out.
That's interesting. I think I was on the opposite side of that. I saw Clubhouse kind of rise, and it felt really trendy, and maybe that growth rate was interesting. But I don't know. I think I had two contrarian takes, and granted, the last 2 years have made predictions very difficult, just on a macro level. But early on, at the start of the pandemic, I was traveling through Europe, and I was following all these people like Balaji and Nassim Taleb on Twitter, and I saw how things were shutting down in Europe. So I came back to the States. and it was about to be South by Southwest in Austin. And all of my friends were like, "Oh, have you seen this petition to like cancel South by Southwest?" And I was like, "Yeah, that's a good thing because this is a crazy virus that's coming." So I was early on that, but then a couple months in, there was all these grand proclamations that like, you know, we would never go to baseball games again. We would never go to movie theaters again. We would never hug each other again. And then we saw some of these like rise, you know, the rise of virtual platforms and Clubhouse. And I took the opposite side of that too. I was like, I think human nature is going to prevail against like any sort of short-term trend, right? So Clubhouse for me fell into that category where I think it was really special during a time where we weren't getting a lot of that spontaneous audio or visual based communication. But I figured as soon as things opened up, people were going to be like, the coffee shop sounds a little more fun.
Yeah. I mean, I think the one benefit is that it does give you access to people, and so many things happened during COVID to do this, but platforms like Clubhouse do give you access to people that you wouldn't have access to at a coffee house, or maybe if you can't make it to a conference or something like that. But I think we're seeing that play out in a lot of other spaces now, like literal spaces, the Twitter spaces, I think have really taken off. But also I've seen a lot more like fireside chat style webinars. So I know you all have one, but just that's way more appealing to me than watching a webinar. Like I will very rarely sign up for an actual presentation. But I love just showing up and being able to chat with someone. So I guess that's like you didn't need like a whole new platform for that. That can just be a Zoom. And the simplest solution sometimes wins.
Is some of this stuff, do you think, going to be a part of the metaverse? Like, do you think people are going to put on a headset and maybe like collaborate in some virtual space and meet people in a virtual bar or coffee shop of sorts? Or
yeah, I can see that. I think honestly, it doesn't appeal to me to add virtual socialization in that sense, like being like using VR to like be virtually physically in a space or something like that. But I do think I've read a little bit about virtual co-working, I think, is another trend that has been sort of bubbling up and bubbling around for a couple of years now. And seeing that, I would think that could then play into a space in the metaverse where it is, you know, the coffee shop that you go to work, or another small community space, like a co-working space virtually, where you can connect with other people who maybe have a shared interest or a shared profession. But you can also benefit from some of those things people like about virtual co-working, like, you know, body doubling or having someone kind of virtually in the space with you, or maybe just being able to have a little coffee break and, you know, discuss things at the water cooler. Yeah, it's not something that I've checked out, but I could see that becoming a trend.
I could see it working for people that you know, people that you work with, but for strangers and new meetings, like I tried to do that. Meta put out, they have some product or some app in the Quest, and you can go in and it's like you can watch concerts and there's a bunch of people hanging out and you don't know them and they're just like all these avatars. And I thought it was fucking weird. Like I stepped in and I saw like people chatting and I was like, I'm out. Like I can't do this.
Yeah, dude. I think I would like it more if it was people from my company or people from, you know, my like just my smaller professional network or something like that. But I agree. I don't think that would really appeal to me. But I don't know, man. There's a trend for everybody, and there's always a niche. I think that's one thing that I've learned about social is that, like, especially you look at TikTok, and there's a niche for everyone. There is not one experience of using TikTok. There is book talk, personal finance talk, you know, all of these different streams of content. And so I feel like as the metaverse grows, it'll be something like that too. There's going to be a place for everyone.
That's how Twitter kind of works too, right? Like there's overlaps, but there's marketing Twitter, there's like fin Twitter. Like there's all these different little sub niches. And I feel like I'm a part of several of them. So I get to see multiple conversations and some crossover, but there's really no one Twitter. It seems like to me.
Yeah, that's what keeps it interesting, because you can also, like, as your interests evolve, you can sort of move through the space as you adjust who you're following, who you're interacting with. You can really see your experience shift over time. Like when I first got on Twitter way back in the day, I got on it to promote my food blog, which is now defunct, but that was how I kind of got into marketing way back when. And so all of my community on Twitter was bloggers, and it was a lot of lifestyle bloggers, food bloggers, and that was who I was really following and engaging with. And then now I would say it's really switched, mostly tech marketers and, a lot of writers, freelancers, as well as a lot of like social justice organizations that I follow. But it just evolves the same way that you do, and the same way that your lifestyle and your interests do.
Remind me to ask you about the food blog later, but first I want to ask you, given your exposure to this data, what have you been surprised to learn, or is there anything that you've changed your mind about, or trends that you've seen based on your exposure to this data?
One that has stood out to me as a constant is that no matter what Facebook does, like Facebook will be the juggernaut for a very long time to come. So even as we see networks like TikTok really explosively taking off, people are still, like in our index survey, people are still saying Facebook's the platform they're going to use the most, they're going to use more.
Is that as a user or as like a marketer and ads manager?
So I believe it's both. Let me check my notes.
I feel like that's almost contrarian, because I keep hearing about Meta stock dropping and like hiring free. I guess like it's a weird time just economically, but I feel like I hear a lot about like the decline of usage in Meta, and I'm not sure how true that actually is.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's also so many ways to use Facebook because it's now such a robust platform. So even, I mean, speaking personally, I barely use the feed anymore, but I use groups all the time. And I feel like it's similar to how I would go to Reddit for specific interest groups and to be able to be part of these conversations with other people who care about that. I don't really use it for friends and family connection as much anymore. It's more about like finding a common interest. And that's so different from how it started out and maybe like the first 5 or 6 years that I was using it as an individual. So so Facebook still reigns. I mean, and I think another one was that consumers are planning to use YouTube even more, which is no surprise at all, but it didn't really match up with the percentage of marketers planning to use YouTube more in the coming year. So I think that makes sense because YouTube is perceived as being a very high investment platform and somewhere that you need to have really polished content, and perhaps a video professional or something like that in order to be successful. But I would argue that's not really true anymore, especially with the emphasis right now on shorts. Like there's so many ways to connect, and you don't have to have a video team or creme de la creme production quality in order to be successful.
YouTube to me feels still underrated. I know it's like the second largest search engine and like there's tons and tons of users, but like it's still, both as a user and a marketer, it feels underrated to me. Like as a user, I go on and like, I use it to relax at the end of the day, and I'll watch videos that are more educational than some college classes I took. Like I was a music major when I started school, just for a semester. Thought I was going to do that, but I'll go on and watch like these really deep and entertaining and awesome music theory videos. And in like 15 minutes, I understand why Radiohead's Creep is such a great sound or something like that, and it's like, those are these little niches that I can find myself in. And, it's not actually that little. I look at the video, the play counts on those, and there's sometimes 500,000, 1 million views for what I decipher as like a very like niche subject. So it seems like people can really make a lot of headway on YouTube if you kind of find that niche.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've been starting to produce some educational videos at Sprout. And as I've been researching for that project and putting together the briefs for the videos and looking at related content that's already out there, there is such a spectrum from the beautiful, wonderfully produced high talent videos to people just doing a screen recording and, showing you how they work through some formulas in a sheet and just, talking through it, kind of like a Loom video or something like that. But those videos also have a lot of success because I think people want, just as much as they enjoy the sort of more entertaining feel of something super polished, I think people also want to be able to have a tutorial they can kind of watch and walk alongside in their own practice if they're trying to learn something. And it doesn't have to be fancy to accomplish that end.
Yeah, those like, you're on Twitter quite a bit, right? Those like viral tweets that are always like, Twitter is the free university. Like, here's 10 lessons you can learn about like X subject. I actually feel that is true about YouTube. Because I was listening to a podcast with one of my favorite thinkers, Tyler Cowen, this economist, And he's like, at the end of the day, like I actually watch YouTube a lot of the times now instead of reading books on nonfiction subjects. I find it more engaging, more educational, and often these nonfiction books take, a week or two to get through, and it could have been a blog post. Whereas YouTube, I actually go to for tutorials and advanced kind of content. So I think that's an interesting trend.
And I think too, some of the really, like, to go really granular, some of the platform features, like now being able to separate out like chapters of a video, like things like that really help you navigate in ways like they've added more wayfinding within longer videos in a way that blogs had previously, but YouTube didn't necessarily. So it helps you also to like skip around and glean exactly what info you want, which I think aligns really well to how people consume content like on the internet today.
Right. One of your colleagues actually told me that one of the points I should discuss with you is that you've been integral in leading your team's foray into regularly producing video content. So I'm wondering, like, two things, and you can answer one at a time, obviously. But one, what was the impetus that pushed you into saying we should do video content? And then the second is, it seems like it would be easy enough to measure if you're like an influencer or just a creator who's monetizing on ads or maybe affiliate. But I imagine it's hard to like really prove the ROI of that as a brand, especially selling to the enterprise. I know for us, like if we sell an agency deal, it's really hard to track that back to somebody watching a YouTube video, like some interview that we put out. So yeah, first question would be like, what drove you to that idea, and how do you kind of quantify it?
Yeah. So we just published our first video earlier this month. So we don't have too many results yet, but I can talk about the approach. We do have, YouTube presence, and historically it's been primarily led by our social team. We have a lot of like kind of a combination of thought leadership videos, employer brand videos. And it's really creative and beautiful, but it isn't a platform that we've invested that much in. And for me, just everything we just talked about in terms of how we like to consume content, how people learn today, I think all of that is happening on YouTube. So for me, it was really a conviction that we had underinvested in YouTube and we were missing this huge opportunity. So we're, as you mentioned earlier, like we're a very SEO driven company. We incorporate, SEO is a huge factor in our content strategy. And it felt like, wow, we're missing a huge search engine, and we're missing a new wave of discoverability. And for me, it's also, it's YouTube right now, but you're also starting to see a lot of conversation about how TikTok is also becoming, essentially a search engine for Gen Z in particular. So I'm hoping that by investing in YouTube now and then thinking about how can we repurpose that content, how can we learn from that content, as well as our TikTok content already, of course, I think we'll be able to move into that and maybe try to be a little more ahead of the curve. So that was why I just thought it was so important. And it's also part of repurposing our content. So Sprout has had a blog since it was founded, so over a decade, and there's tons and tons of great written content, but people just like to learn differently and they like to engage differently. I think they also find it really appealing to hear from an individual and to really kind of see a bit more of a character talking to them than a fairly anonymous writer. Like, of course, everyone has a byline and they have a bit of their own voice, but the writer isn't as prominent on a blog as the speaker and talent is in a YouTube video. So I just thought it was a huge opportunity for us that could really weave together a lot of the learnings we have from other types of content, and something that we should invest in. So we've started out with a monthly video, some of the core topics in social that we know people want addressed and that have done really well as blog content in the past. And in terms of measurement, you're right that it is a lot harder to track directly to revenue. And I think that's something that I'm more comfortable with, because before content, I was focused more on PR, and it's kind of the same thing. Like, you can get an amazing placement and that it is good if your brand was featured in, New York Times or Adweek or something like that, but you probably can't say, okay, and we close this deal specifically because of that. So YouTube kind of falls into the same camp to me. So we're measuring what we can measure. We're measuring a lot of the social metrics of the videos themselves on YouTube and other platforms. And then on the content side, we're using UTM tags in all of the links. We're promoting some of our website content within the videos and within the descriptions. And we're going to track any traffic from that. I don't anticipate that it will be massive. I would expect most of this traffic comes through later as organic search traffic or direct traffic to our website. But that's what we can do for now. So we're looking at that, and then also search ranking changes and influence.
Yeah, it feels like one of those things that you put in maybe a less quantifiable brand bucket.
Mm-hmm.
And I know when we chatted before, you had mentioned like this focus on SEO kind of allows you to pay the piper, right? Like you can basically like directly attribute revenue or at least leads from blog content that's ranking in search. So like that gives you that more straightforward, more direct response bucket. And maybe that's, it depends on like your company stage, but maybe in a portfolio that's like 60, 80% of what you're doing. And then you leave open some basket where it's like, this is probably going to be beneficial. It might not, it might be hugely successful, but we can't track it in the same direct response way. So we can probably say just with common sense that as long as we're using guardrails and not, doing crazy viral, unrelated content, like if we're doing a video on like how to schedule a LinkedIn post or something like that also works on the blog, to a certain degree that 10,000 people watching that is a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me, this is an area where I'm just trying to beat the drum really hard. And I think getting the executive buy-in for continued investment in areas like this, especially right now, before we have a lot of insight into the performance, since we've only launched one, and because it is less direct, like that's kind of the challenge that I'm focusing on right now. So how can I pull together a portfolio of early results, of industry data, of my belief as to why this will be so effective for us, and make that case to the people I know care a lot about organic search as a way of raising our visibility and creating demand for the product. So so far so good, but I'm hoping that we can just keep expanding next year as well.
Was it hard to get buy-in for this, or are you in sort of a pilot program right now? Do you still need to kind of like showcase your results to get more buy-in? What was the process like to get that idea out in front and actually get maybe budget or resources for this?
Yeah, I think this is a pilot, but I've always positioned it as, as long as this doesn't go horribly, this should become a standard part of our content strategy and something that we're just always continuously publishing. So when we first started this, we put together a proposal kind of outlining why video, why now. And I think some of it is we need to diversify our content portfolio, like having a very SEO driven blog, there's a lot of volatility there. And that can't be the only thing that we're relying on. And obviously we have other types of content as well, but investing more in YouTube is a big play to diversify our total content ecosystem. So kind of putting that point of view forward. And then really at that point, honestly, it was more about getting buy-in from our creative team and our creative partners on how we wanted to execute it and just planning how to prioritize it across all of the other work they work on. So they helped us hire an agency that we've been working on for this. And for year one, it was not hard to get buy-in. I think what I'm looking at for next year is I would like, ideal world, I would like to quadruple this investment. So maybe we land in the middle and we're able to double it. So that's kind of where I'm thinking about getting buy-in for the future.
Yeah, you're combining both of Robert Cialdini's persuasion tactics, the foot in the door, where, you make a small ask, you get one video out a month, and then you're following up with the door in the face, which is like you ask for something super high and then hope that they come down and meet in the middle.
Yeah. I think I was actually talking to our associate creative director on the video team yesterday, and these videos we're doing now are more long form, like very polished, produced content. They're wonderful. They're really high quality. They're really engaging. And I think they stand out from what's already there. But I'd like to think about other series we can do. I think a huge trend we're seeing on TikTok in particular, but also from consumer brands, is a lot more character-driven storytelling. And so one series I've been really obsessed with recently is Miranda in the Wild from REI. So I've been researching backpacking trips, and she does a lot of backpacking content and, highlighting REI gear, answering common questions, and just kind of teaching about the space. And it's very driven by her and by her personality and how she puts together all of the content. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to play around with something like that for us, and maybe like a shorter form, like something that feels a little less scripted and put together. and experiment with that alongside some of this long form content.
Where are you going backpacking?
So this weekend, I'm going to Forest Glen Preserve, which is in Illinois. So that is a quick, closer trip because I haven't backpacked since college. So I need to go out there, work out the kinks, make sure that I understand the basics. And then in September, I'm planning to do the Tour de Mont Blanc, which is a trip in France, Italy, and Switzerland. It's traditionally a hut-to-hut trail, but I'm going to camp a lot of it just because of COVID. And also I like camping. So we're going to see how it goes.
That sounds badass.
It looks really fun. And that's actually something I am deep in Facebook groups. I feel like I've really entered like the retirement phase of my interests because it's me and a lot of people who are like 50s through 70s in this Facebook group, but it's 20,000 people sharing all of their tips, doing route checks and feedback, providing gear feedback, and like, how do you get your pack lighter? What restaurants do you go to when you're in this town? Things like that. So the planning process has honestly been really, really fun before even getting to the trip.
I think that if anything, the pandemic accelerated maybe our age-based interests because it made a bunch of 20-somethings and 30-somethings start baking bread and gardening and quilting.
Yeah. I mean, you have to have something that gets you off a screen, right? And all of those interests, they really do.
Totally. I started doing puzzles. Like I just bought a bunch of like the big table puzzles and I was like, what am I doing? Yeah.
Have you ever done a 3D puzzle? Because that's what my grandparents would do when I was a kid, and they were very impressive. They're like, the ones they had were often wooden puzzles. And yeah, they're just like kind of knots, like that beautiful decorative wooden knots. And so you have to take them all apart and figure out how to rebuild it. And it's definitely a level up if you want something to frustrate you after a flat puzzle.
My problem, and this is probably indicative of all productivity and all of my work, is that I enjoy starting the puzzle and I can't finish the puzzle. I'll get like 80% of the way there and I'm like, this isn't worth it. It's just a bunch of like dark colored pieces and I can't tell the difference and too much.
I think that's kind of what's kept me away from puzzles. But I was doing sourdough before the pandemic, but I got back into it for sure. And I started like giving people some starter and trying to see if they would do it as well. Getting back into crochet. So yeah, I'm very much feeling that shift.
You said that starting a food blog was your first foray into content marketing?
Yes. When I first graduated from college, my first job after school was I was an AmeriCorps volunteer for a college access program in Illinois called the Schuler Scholar Program. And so I was working in a high school. And when you do AmeriCorps, you get a living stipend. So you're a full-time volunteer and you get a living stipend rather than a salary. So you're really not making a lot of money. And a coworker and I decided that we would combine her love of baking with my love of cooking and start a blog called The Humble Foodie about our food adventures, on a budget and what we were trying to get creative with and stuff like that. And then, so I was really into it. She was less into it over time. And so it ended up kind of becoming my project. And I started learning about, wow, I'm getting thousands of visitors every month to my tiny blog for my paleo sushi recipe. Like, why is that happening? And that's how I learned about SEO. And I was like, I rank #1 in Google for a paleo sushi. Like, okay, so like, what else could I do that's like that? How else could I find these ideas? And so it wasn't very professional at the time, but it was just sort of learning through trial and error. And that was also where I started getting interested in using social for marketing and building brands. So I was kind of doing that on the side of my job. And it ended up becoming, after I finished my second year of AmeriCorps, I started a marketing role with that nonprofit, kind of building their marketing program from scratch. So it was a lot of fun. And it definitely was what opened my eyes to the career I have now.
Is rice technically paleo? Is that like a gray area, or how do you make paleo sushi?
So I used cauliflower rice. I think I was following a lot of the like Whole30 principles, which is a company and like a challenge that is very strict for 30 days. And so at the time, at least, rice was definitely not allowed. It's very like anti-grain in general. And so I used cauliflower rice and then, the nori sheets and all kinds of fish and veggies. And it was fun because it was a craft, essentially like a cooking craft type thing where I got to experiment and learn new things. And then it was really, really validating to see that other people were actually finding that information and finding it helpful.
I often use paleo blogs and food blogs in general when I'm teaching courses or webinars on content marketing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm actually surprised because I feel like in the B2B space, we're very kind of mature, or at least in MarTech, we're very mature with content marketing, and enterprise or bottoms up, or, you know, any type of company is going to use content marketing to drive actual user growth. Whereas it surprises me that like paleo food product companies don't do the same type of blogging that the affiliate bloggers do. It's like, it seems like that would be a really easy path, given that it's a pretty low consideration purchase. But I see all kinds of B2C and D2C companies ignoring that channel completely. Meanwhile, bloggers are making millions just with affiliate stuff. That's crazy.
Yeah, it is. I mean, and that space is so saturated. And I was very into paleo for a couple of years way back when, but have happily become an omnivore now. And,
yeah, bread is way better than not eating bread.
I love bread, and I like making it too, which is really, you know, you don't want to make bread if you're not going to touch it. So, but yeah, I agree. I mean, I think there's a lot of sort of community driven sites out there that are like recipe aggregators. So Paleo Hacks, I think, was a really big one back when I was blogging. I don't know if they're still as popular, but kind of a combo like forum and recipe curation. But yeah, there's a whole sea of food content out there. So it was really fun. And then I moved to a different blog name after a while. And then eventually, once I started my job at Sprout, I was actually doing some blogging, you know, collaborating with the SEO team and writing some of our early pieces about like Instagram strategy, and just doing that at work all day, really. And also, you know, making a regular salary kind of made me lose interest in keeping up the blog itself. But it was a wonderful part of like my first few professional years, and obviously such a great on-ramp to what I'm doing now.
So that kickstarted you into your career, at least concretely. But I heard that one of your youth hobbies was writing fan fiction.
Wow. I love that someone revealed that to you. I'm going to have to find that friend. Yes. My high school and middle school, I think I was actually in middle school. We had we got really into Harry Potter fan fiction. And then several of us started writing fan fiction. And it was on, I think the website's like fanfiction.org or fanfiction.net or something. That's like the main place that people do fanfiction from all across different novels. And we kind of started like competing a little bit, you know, like who can get the most, I don't know if it's comments or likes, like or subscribers on the stories. So it was really fun. And yeah, I think that was a great place to hone my writing. I'm not going to tell you what it was about or how to find it, but I did go back and read some of it the other day. And aside from some very teenage language, like around like crystal tears and such, I think it was like pretty quality writing. I was kind of impressed for middle school me.
Do you still write fiction? Do you keep a writing habit?
I don't. I journal, but I haven't really written anything outside of the working world for a while.
Right. It feels like writing's been a throughput though, right? Like you started the blog, you were writing a lot, you did the fan fiction, you were writing a lot. Do you consider yourself a writer at heart, or what is your kind of like core essence as a marketer?
Yeah, I would say writer and storyteller. I think reading and writing has always been the core for me. And that's how I like to consume information. That's how I like to share things. It's where I feel most confident. But I've been trying to, you know, push myself like with this video project. I'm not doing it because I'm an expert in it. I'm doing it because I think it's a really great strategic move. And we have creative people across the team who are more expert in it, that I think my role is kind of to rally and help tell their stories. So I'm trying to evolve from mostly writer to storyteller, which is a very fun place to be.
How do you evolve into a storyteller?
I think for me, it's thinking beyond the written word. That's the main change. That's the main shift for me personally, is thinking about like the different ways to tell stories, the different media, the different platforms. You know, I think you could consider a Twitter thread to be a story. You could consider, obviously, video, of course, is one of the best storytelling mechanisms. So for me, it's just thinking beyond like what I would like as the audience and what I feel comfortable in, and trying to push that to what do other people like and feel comfortable in, and how can I adapt what I'm sharing so that it's going to be consumed in the best way possible, that people are going to enjoy it the most, or they're going to learn from it the most. And trying to prioritize that over, my own personal interests or comfort zone.
That's funny. I find that's a real sticking point for me. Like I like writing, but I think I'm idiosyncratic in that I write for myself, that it's very hard for me to think, maybe not everyone likes a 4,000 word deep dive essay on this. Like maybe there's a different format that like the people I'm trying to reach would prefer, but it's very difficult for me to like get outside of my own head when I'm writing, at least for my own website. I think with clients, it's a little bit easier, and it's facilitating a strategic purpose, but that's always been a hard gap for me to kind of bridge.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, even back when I was blogging, so it was for fun, but I did make some money from it. It was harder to write posts for myself than it was to do sponsored posts for brands, because I loved, like, especially just doing it entirely myself, not working with a team or professionals or anything. Like, I never had a content brief. I never had a content strategy, really. And so getting a brief from a company that I was partnering with was so exciting, because having parameters really helped me figure out like exactly kind of where to play around. And I think that was a good learning for me about like, okay, so I can bring that structure to how I'm writing for myself, like what's working for me well in those types of projects. How can I bring that into how I'm planning and executing my own content as well? But it's not everything has to have parameters. And so that's something that I think is important in personal writing too.
And that's where the journaling habit comes in. It's more free form, more expressive.
Yeah, absolutely. Journaling, and like half my journal is just lists. So lists, whether it's like a packing, instead of writing that I'm excited to go on this trip, it's what is the packing list? And that, I mean, if you want to be generous about it, that tells the story of what the trip is going to be. Why are you packing headlamps to go to Arizona? Okay, well, the story of that is I want to go on a hike with my friends. And, I don't know, I think you can kind of, I at least try to pretend that I'm being very creative in all of my list making.
Do you ever go back and read your old journals and, I don't know, shake your head at what you were writing about, or
Yes.
admire your prescience or something like that?
Yeah, usually it's shake my head. But yeah, I do. I mean, I think I do go back and read them, and it is honestly really heartening, because I can see how far I've come, and I can see some of the things that I really struggled with back then, and think about like, things that I've done in my life to improve. Like, I think for me, like I've always had pretty bad anxiety. So I see that in my journals from my early 20s, and I see how terribly it was playing out in work, in my relationships, and in my relationship with like work and my identity, and the need to always be productive and doing something. So working full time, blogging, freelancing. And then I think about, how I spent the second half of my 20s kind of really reflecting and working on that a lot, and where I am today. And that's so exciting. So having those more detailed journals from back then is definitely, it can be a weird trip down memory lane, but it can also be really nice.
I love that. I wish I had better handwriting, because I can't even read my own old journals. How you seem very introspective. So how much of your creative inspiration, ideation comes from reflection and introspection versus external sources of inspiration, be that movies, culture, art, anything that you can kind of pull from outside of you? And it could be a combination, obviously.
Yeah. I think it's a combination. I like to start with kind of what I think the brainstorming model is like divergence and convergence. So like I like to start with gathering all of the inspiration, hearing from other people, and taking in a lot of external sources, and then sleeping on it. That's always the tactic. Sleep on it, let your brain kind of do its thing when you're not paying attention. And that's when I come back to it myself and try to think about like, okay, whatever the goal is, or whatever the structure is, or the reason that I'm trying to come up with ideas, then kind of like letting my brain loose. And those things will kind of organically pull through. Some of them are more inspiring than others, but that's where also like the synthesis that happens, I think, when you just digest a lot and then give yourself a little space from it. To me, that fuels the best brainstorms. And that's where my ideas start to come from. But honestly, like, I think in my role today, I almost see my job as more facilitating other people's amazing ideas and creative inspiration rather than it being me who's coming up with it. So we're, for example, I think later this week, we're doing a brainstorm to get started on our content strategy for next year that one of my team members is leading. And I am so excited because everyone on our team is so different and has such a different perspective and interest and all of that. So I think my role is to really like hear all of those out, align them with company goals, and then figure out which of their amazing ideas we can synthesize and execute.
How do you facilitate that? Especially given that there may be like diverse personalities and viewpoints. Like, how do you, I mean, I'm somebody who is always firing off ideas, most of them bad. So I feel like I need less encouragement, but I feel like some people have just so much knowledge and so many ideas, but it's a little more of a process to get them to share them and like, you know, feel confident, like pouring those out during those brainstorming sessions.
Yeah, I agree. Cause I'm very much like you. Like I'm always firing off ideas and I don't usually expect people to do anything with them. I'm kind of just like, what do you think about this? Like,
yeah, I feel no shame over bad ideas too.
Yes, exactly. And you know, don't take them too seriously. Like they're just ideas. But one thing that we've really tried to do over the years is make our brainstorms more inclusive. So I think understanding how people like to work, and you know, on our team, we do have a lot of people who would prefer to have some information in advance and kind of go and like think through it and process themselves. So I think providing an agenda, providing prep work or anything that you want people to do or review to make sure that they're on the same page and they're prepared to contribute. I think that really helps. And, you know, my inclination, because I do like to just riff and talk through things, is to do none of that and to just show up maybe with 3 questions. But that approach of adding structure, I think has really helped people feel more confident contributing and more confident, like coming into the brainstorm with some ideas, but also listening to what everyone else has to say and just feeling a little bit more prepared to contribute to that.
And follow up on the people side, having built a team, having hired many content marketers, what have you learned about what dimensions make up a good content marketer?
I think curiosity, which you mentioned earlier, is so important. And that is, you know, it's hard to quantify, but that's like the spark that you get in an interview is you can see that somebody is curious about something or they're passionate about something. I don't care what it is, and it doesn't have to be content, but they just have to have that interest in life and interest in what's going on around them. Because I think that can just like, if you have that, and then you have strong, you know, kind of writing and critical thinking skills, you can do so much in content. So I'd say curiosity, proactiveness. You know, I think our team, I like for people to be able to be as autonomous as possible, obviously with the support of the team behind them. So looking for people who see a problem and who say something or who solve the problem instead of people who are like, no, I'm just going to wait and see if somebody brings it my way. I think that's really important. And I think for us too, it's kind of like having an open mind and being collaborative because we work with a lot of teams at Sprout very, very closely. And so being able to be the representative of content to the social team or to the PR team, the demand gen team, I think it's important to just sort of have those like, I guess, you know, communication, diplomatic skills and ability to bring together multiple perspectives, not only your own.
How do you, I think that maybe I'm better at that now, but when I was early in my career, I don't think I was as good at the communication side. I actually, when I was at HubSpot, I put a Post-it note on my laptop. This is embarrassing, but it just said like over communicate because I would never send Slack messages. I would always just be off doing my work, assuming that that was my job, but I wasn't good at explaining what I was doing or like roping other people in, you know, giving feedback loops, you know, for people that I was working with. I was very bad at that stuff. And I had a good manager who kind of noted that in a diplomatic way. But how do you facilitate that? And is that always something that people come in with, or is that something that is, you know, you can develop that too?
I kind of had the same experience that you did. And I do think that skill needs to be built over time because it's very much a workplace skill. I think most people don't grow up in their personal lives thinking like, I should really merchandise my work. And so being like, for me, it was the same as you, having good managers who said, you need to talk about the work you're doing because, very candidly, if I don't know about it, or if my boss doesn't know about it, how are you going to get a raise, or how are you going to get a promotion? And if your coworkers don't know about it, how can they help you, or how can they give you insight that might improve your work? So having, I think my manager and then her manager as well, in my first couple of jobs at Sprout, really emphasized that concept of merchandising your work, and not bragging about it, but letting people know what you're doing or what you're experimenting with, as well as any results, and also learning how to call people in to that. So sharing results and then saying, I think there's a good learning here for the social team. Like, what do you think? Like, here's what my takeaway would be. Does that track with what you all are seeing? And I think that can open up some really good conversations and relationship building as well. So I definitely do think it has to be built, and it's a great skill. I think it really is just so helpful in any type of role, but especially in content where we're very cross-functional.
Yeah, I think that one's underrated. And I think it's one of the more developable skills, especially if you're in an enterprise, like larger company environment. The two things that I've found that are difficult to alter or improve upon the job is, you mentioned the first point, the passion and curiosity. I call it kind of giving a shit. Like I can read in an interview, I can read that about somebody. Like it's a very gut feeling, and I can even read it on the page when somebody like turns in an article or something like that. You can kind of tell if they're phoning it in versus like if they really, really care about the thing. And I think that's really hard to train. That's something that's kind of inherent. Maybe it comes in waves, and maybe it's about certain subjects, but I think that's hard to like develop once you're on the job. And then I actually forgot my other thing that was hard to trade. So that's the big one. I think that the communication side is, if you're open to developing there, if you're stubborn, obviously it's not going to like go well, but like, I think that's a little bit more trainable.
Yeah. I mean, I think I saw this back when I was working in a high school. So it was a college access program. We were helping students with like reading coaching, STEM coaching, after school programs around, time management, public speaking, things like that. And one of the things that we saw students really struggle with was asking for help. And they have to get there themselves to be able to do that. But often like that was where students would really struggle the most, was they wouldn't ask for help. And then it was too late. And we saw the result, we saw that they failed a class or something like that. And an area that we could have provided extra tutoring, we could have paired them up with a friend who had really good study habits. We could have done so many things, but they didn't want to tell anyone that it was hard for them, or they felt maybe like they were alone. They're the only one who is struggling with this. And that experience working with high school students and talking about that really, really openly with them has definitely carried into the work world for me. And I think, communicating about your work in a proactive way with good results and things like that, that's very important, but also not being afraid to ask questions and to say when you don't understand something. I mean, I try to model that all the time. And it's because, one, I need to, because I need to understand certain things to do my job, but two, because I want people on the team to know that asking, there's no dumb questions. And if you don't know something, like if you don't know what a metric means, or if you don't understand why someone's asking you to do something in a content brief, or it just feels off to you, like those are very valuable conversations, and it's everyone's responsibility to bring them up.
I don't know, maybe I don't have the longevity to know the answer to this, but it feels like the ability to say that I don't know to something, I feel like that is rare, but it feels like that's getting rarer. And I'm just riffing here. Maybe this is true, maybe this is not. But I feel like there's a lot of thought leaders now that are highly accessible via like podcasts and Twitter. And we trust them for not just their domain of expertise, but for many things that they opine on. And one thing that I was really impressed by, I wish I remembered who this was on a podcast, but the interviewer asked a question about something, political or like, macroeconomic or something like pretty like grandiose and outside of the person's wheelhouse. It was like an evolutionary biologist or something like that. And the person being interviewed was like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I have no opinion on that. I've never studied that. Like, I really don't feel qualified." and the interview tried to prod and say like, well, if you had an opinion, what would it be?
Yeah.
The person's like, no, seriously, like, I don't know more than your audience. So I really don't feel comfortable doing that. I was like, that should be more common. I love that.
Absolutely. I was listening to a podcast a while back by, I think Vicki Robin. She co-wrote Your Money or Your Life, and she has a podcast, or this episode was about healing the polarization in ourselves. And so it was really a reaction to just how polarized points of view and information have become in our society, and how to kind of look inward about your own tendencies in that area. And I think it is that polarization, it kind of ties into the same concept of like expecting people to have a strong opinion about everything, even if it's an uneducated opinion, just because beliefs have to be strong now. And someone saying, I believe this really strongly, and then I learned and I changed my mind, is, I think, one of the things that most convinces me that someone has integrity and that they are really smart and thinking critically. But a lot of people are not comfortable doing that.
Have you ever been like 2 minutes into arguing a point or like saying something that you believe, and then you stop and you're like, wait, I actually don't even believe this. Like, what am I talking about? Like, I'll find myself in conversations doing that. I'm like, I actually don't know anything about our healthcare system. Like, why do I feel so strong? Like, I am parroting something that I read online or something like that.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, because I'm very stubborn and I'm very tenacious when I think I'm right. So I will dive into an argument and then have that exact realization and just feel like, okay, how can I back out of this in the least awkward way possible? But I think that's important, because I don't want to be spouting off about things that are nonsense, effectively nonsense. And there are so many smart people out there and so many good resources available to us, like through the internet, the library, anywhere that we want to look, that if I don't know about something, it's not worth talking about, when I could just, point people in that direction.
All right. Well, let's ignore all of what we just said and maybe state a very strong and bold claim. What's a contrarian opinion you have about content marketing? What's something you believe about content that most people would disagree with you on?
I would say, you can tell me if you think most people would disagree, but I think that all content, bar none, should be entertaining. And I think that people often think, okay, what's the goal of this? Is to educate. The goal of this is to sell something. Well, if you don't have some spark in it, it's not going to hook people. And so entertain doesn't mean, you've got somebody cracking up about it. Like, obviously not all content should make people laugh or something like that, but you have to give them something that is enticing enough to create a story in your head that aligns with what you're trying to do. And to me, that's entertainment, and it comes in so many different forms. I mean, you can make a sell sheet entertaining. It doesn't need to be always a narrative. So I think that's one that the people would do well to keep in mind, is that you can really bring that perspective to any content you're working on. And that's what we see people are looking for, especially on social, but social trends have so much to do with content trends. So I think looking at that data is really valuable.
I love that. And I think I agree, but I don't have a strong enough opinion to argue with you. So
yeah, well, we can put it out to Twitter. I'm sure there's some strong opinions out there.
Oh, not on Twitter. Really? There's people with strong opinions there. Wild. All right. So let's wrap up here. This was an awesome conversation. So where can people find you online? And if you have any calls to action?
Yeah, well, I would love to connect with anybody who's interested on Twitter. So I'm Alicia B. Johnston on Twitter. And right now, I would say the thing I'm most excited about is a new creators data report that we just put out. So we have a ton of insight about the creator economy, marketers' strategy and investment, consumers' interest, as well as some pricing benchmarks, which surprised me because I think there's a slightly lower bar to getting involved with content creators than I had originally assumed. So if folks want to check that out, I will share the link with you for the show notes.
Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes. Thanks so much. This was an awesome conversation.
Agreed. Thank you so much. This is really fun.